Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Nothing Special 6, His Heart's Command, by A.E. Villa, narrated by Aiden Snow. Chapter 1. Free. Okay, we're gonna take a little shortcut, fellas. Make a left onto the dirt road right before the next stoplight. We'll lose them if we get off this street free, Rux said. No, we won't. I still got eyes on them. Then you'll lose us, Rux countered. Not for long. Free was as calm as he always was, even with his good friends chasing down 3 heavily armed men. What's the name of the road, Free? Green asked. Free could see the detective through his cabin dashboard cameras. He masterfully handled the powerful F-350 while Free navigated him through the sticks of Gainesville from the station. Free's hands moved over his keyboard so fast he no longer thought about it, only the results. He had multiple maps up on the screen to his left. It doesn't appear to have a name. Every road has a name, Free, Tech argued. Free saw his best friend's scowl as he was jostled around in the back seat of Green's truck. He zoomed in closer on the grainy satellite image. No street marker. Well, this one doesn't. Turn, now! Shit, Green cursed. The sound of squealing tires reached Free's ears. I don't think this is an actual road, Free, Tech said. We're in the goddamned woods, Free, Green yelled. He flinched when he checked the monitor displaying Green's forward camera. Branches and brush flew up in all directions, hitting the truck's windshield. This is killing my truck, Green rumbled. You're gonna pay furious to fix all these dents, Freeman. This isn't even a road, Steele grunted. It's probably called Last Minutes of Your Life Trail. Keep going, Sin commanded calmly. The team's sergeant stood behind Free while he worked, only chiming in when he absolutely needed to. He knew how to let Free do his job. The vehicle is still in my sight. Suspects are turning left on East Hall. Another 75 meters and you're there, Free said confidently, still watching the monitor displaying the satellite image of P. Davidson Road. Roger that, Green gritted out through the radio. Free never took his eyes off the screens. Over 30 years he'd been engrossed in computer technology. He'd gotten used to simultaneously operating multiple devices and systems. It appeared difficult to outsiders, but hacking through satellites and databases was second nature to him. He was just happy to be doing it for the good guys now. The door to their office swung open, but Free didn't turn to see who it was. Instead, he focused on the job. 4 of Atlanta's finest were in the field, in harm's way, and relying on him, so they had his complete attention. He'd been working with the amazing group of detectives for the past 2 months, and as of yet, he'd never let the team down. They all made one pretty impressive unit that the mayor couldn't have been more pleased with. Hart's team is finished with their assignment. They're finally on their way home. God's voice reached him from the other side of the large office. Hart. Coming home. Free turned his head so fast he heard a slight pop in his neck. His lieutenants were both settling at their desks, powering up their computers. God and Day oversaw the Atlanta Police Department's most successful narcotics task force unit. His best friend, Tech, had worked with them for the last 3 years before he'd decided he no longer wanted to be a technology specialist behind the scenes, and wanted to be front and center, kicking ass in the field right beside his lover. Free got it. When his best friend had called and asked for Free to replace him in his position, he couldn't say no. He owed Tech his life. I hear the chief is happy as hell with Hart's team and the job they did. God's grin was wide as he spoke about his friend. What else is new? Day mumbled. You and him thrive on praises and commendations. Not true, God frowned. We're good at what we do. Not our fault it gets recognized. I'm just glad my dog is coming home, though, and right in time for football season. Free! Sin's heavy tap on his shoulder jolted him before firm hands turned him back to his monitors. Oh, shit. He scrambled to keep up with what he'd been doing and what Green had just asked him. "Not much longer," Sin answered instead. 30 meters, Free finally responded, suddenly feeling out of sorts. "What's in 30 meters?" Green barked. "Huh?" Free blinked. He couldn't stop himself from homing in on Hart's name again. The big SWAT captain had been on his mind for weeks. "Did you just say, huh?" Rux snapped. "It's the road you're about to intersect with East Hall. You're already ahead of them," Sin answered. Free checked the monitor, swallowing roughly as he tried to drown out God and Day's conversation in the background. His team cursed and hissed through the comms system. After taking a quick breath, Free fought to concentrate. When you're on East Hall, just face north and point your weapons," Free told them, his brain having to reboot after hearing Hart's name. Green's truck finally burst through the clearing. Free exhaled when he saw the road through Green's dash camera and no more forest. The rest of the bust played out in his ear as he kept the satellite image up for his sergeant to watch the takedown. The 4 enforcers who made up God and Day's team moved effortlessly as they quickly threw out tire spikes, disabling the 4x4 Tacoma they'd been pursuing, and yanking the men out of the vehicle, bringing them face first to the asphalt. God and Day came over to his station at that moment, their attention locked on one of Free's 7 screens. "Those boys coming from the Cornelia gang?" God asked. "Yep, they got him," Sin nodded. "That's the gang leader's 2 biggest players and his little brother. All we need now is the headman himself." "Good work," Day said, standing behind Free's chair, gently kneading his shoulders. His lieutenant was a real touchy-feely kind of guy. Day could be a hard-ass when he needed to get his men in line, but he was also the coolest friend a man could have. He was the complete opposite of his intimidating husband. God didn't touch anyone unless it was Day, or to put a man on his ass. Free turned his head to the side and let Day work on the knot at the base of his skull. He really knew how to give a massage, especially when he was mindlessly moving his hands in thought mode. "Free, text Roe and get him in here to interrogate. He said he'd be in tonight at 6, but tell him to make it sooner. I want this ruthless meth dealer in fucking custody yesterday. I got the chief riding my ass harder than God does." "Done," Free answered. He was already tapping out the message as Day spoke. "You're so perfect for me," Day said, finishing his massage. Free laughed off Day's remarks, which never failed to make him roll his eyes. With the enforcers clear and headed back to the station, Free had a little time to take a break. The moment he swiveled his chair around, he came face to face with his sergeant. He tried not to fidget under Sin's tight scrutiny. "I'm going to go grab a soda, Sin. You want one?" Sin's midnight eyes watched him carefully. In the several weeks Free had been working with the team, Sin had become one of his favorites. Since God and Day were often out of the office, it was Sin's job to manage the department, and he did it with a firm but understanding hand. "No, I'm good." "Okay, then." Free got up, avoiding contact with the perceptive man on his way past. "Will I ever be able to hide anything, working for a bunch of detectives?" He was relieved Sin didn't dig into why Free had frozen in the middle of a job, but he knew the subject would eventually come up. Free left his office and crossed the busy bullpen. Beat cops were at their desk grinding at 5 in the afternoon. Some were working on their reports of the day. Admin officers were interviewing witnesses or taking complaints, and various civilian personnel went about their business. "Hey, Freeman, can you come over here for just a second, please?" Free automatically detoured between the rows of desks to Officer Mason's. He had 7 years on the force and was damn good at profiling, but he sucked with technology. Free wasn't sure how the man had passed the basic qualifications test, but he helped him any time Mason stopped him. The moment the station had discovered that God had one of the best technology experts working for him, the bees had started to swarm. There was a select number of people who knew who he really was, one of the top 5 hackers in the world. When he walked through the station, he was always pulled in a million different directions, individuals needing him to fix any technical issue they had, whether it was a glitchy cell phone or a virus-riddled laptop. He didn't mind. Free liked being helpful, liked feeling needed for all the right reasons. No one there was trying to take advantage of him. "I'm sorry to snag you again. You're probably so sick of me," Mason said, scrubbing his hand over his stern jaw with its 24-hour 5 o'clock shadow. His forehead was bright red, with drops of perspiration along his temples. He was a lost cause when it came to the precinct's new interface system, but he couldn't have been a more polite man. Mason had been one of the officers to go out of his way in the beginning when Free had a question or needed help finding something. "Not possible. You know we're cool," Free smiled. He dropped into one of the interview chairs Mason had beside his desk and peered over at his monitor. "If you need me, you just keep hollering." Mason nodded. The mechanical grimace he'd been wearing a moment before was replaced with a crooked smirk. "Okay. Well, thank you, Freeman. You keep saving me from the ridicule. When I ask my annoying partner for help, he always wants to give me his 2 cents first. Computers don't come easy to everyone, man." "True. Now, what's going on here?" Free asked. He already had control of Mason's mouse and was opening his file explorer, because 9 times out of 10, he was sure that Mason thought he'd lost another file. "I saved all the client's notes from the Sylvia case in one file and the interrogator's notes in a separate folder, and now both of them are gone." Mason repeatedly jammed his finger at the escape button, growling at the monitor as if it were his enemy. Free gently placed his hand over the officer's and stilled his tantrum. "Easy. Doing that won't help. Remember what I said last time. If you feel yourself getting overwhelmed, just take a deep breath and send me a memo." Mason laughed. "You'll get sick of those messages popping up on your screen every hour like an annoying-ass messenger junkie. And besides, I don't think God would like it if I was constantly pulling you away from his department. I have plenty of time when I'm not needed at my desk, so don't worry about that. Just send the message with what you're having a problem with, and I can remote access your terminal and take care of your issue without getting up." "Seriously?" Mason grinned. He's too damn cute. Free found technically challenged men adorable for some reason. "Yeah, sure. If Cox Cable can do it, then why can't I?" Free laughed, all while recovering the file that Mason had dumped into another folder just beneath the one he'd intended to place it in. "But don't ever tell anyone. I'll just do that for you so you won't think you're constantly pulling me away." "You are one cool cat." Mason slapped Free's shoulder, then held his hand out for £1, as if they had a secret deal. Free chuckled, tapping his knuckles with his. You're a cool cat too, Mason." Who says stuff like that? "Now open up the Sylvia file, and all the notes and subfolders should be there." "Yes!" Mason whooped, his megawatt smile returning. "You just saved me 2 days of unnecessary work, Free." "Oh no, Freeman, you had to actually stop and help this idiot again? Somebody get Mason Windows for the dumbest of the dumb." Mason's partner yelled across the bullpen, nudging him when he walked by. Free shook his head as Mason flipped his partner off. "So you good?" "Yeah, thanks, Free. Saved me a ton of time." Free was already moving through the throng of desks, waving goodbye to Mason and his partner. He went into the break room in search of a quick snack before getting back to his station. He was excited to tinker with a new gadget he'd been working on. Once the 4 enforcers for the narcotics team returned, they'd be in the interrogation room for hours, so he didn't have anything pressing to do. He loved that time to himself with nothing but the system he'd customized to meet his specific needs and uninterrupted silence. Free smiled to himself as he popped a few bucks into the vending machine for a meatball sub. Not many people in the station knew what Free's computer system was capable of. Basically any and everything his lieutenants needed of him. Of course, most things they asked of him were within the scope of the law, and that was why Free loved his job. A man with his talents could have worked for anyone, from NASA to the Pentagon. But he wouldn't. Ever. Because the moment he did, it wouldn't have been long before his job duties changed and bordered on immoral, and he was finished with being bullied. That was another reason he hadn't hesitated to take the job when his best friend from college, Tech, had called him. He'd known Tech had been training for years to become a detective. As soon as he'd been promoted and granted field access, he'd asked Free to come to Atlanta and fill his current position as their technology specialist. It had been comical when he'd first made his debut to God and Day. It hadn't exactly been a conventional meeting. He'd hacked their system from the airport as if it were nothing, and snooped on the case they were investigating. It may have ticked God off a bit, but the big guy had quickly come to rely on him over the 2 months he'd been there. He paid for a Diet Coke while he nuked his sandwich in the microwave. Several televisions lined the walls, but all of them were showing different news programs. He wasn't in the mood to be reminded of all the bad going on in the world. He sat at one of the tables facing the entrance. Sometimes he'd use the excuse of wanting a better vending selection from the upstairs break room and eat up there. But he'd really go to sneak a peek through the glass walls of the SWAT department. There was no reason to venture up there and pretend tonight. The entire department was dark and empty, just as it had been for the last 2.5 weeks. But he's on his way home. Free smiled as he bit into the bland, about to expire in 2 days sandwich. Not much could ruin his great mood. Only Tech knew how bad he had it for the huge captain. Gosh, every time Free thought about how Hart had stuck up for him at God and Day's bachelor party against that creepy cop Vasquez, it made his heart race. He'd even seen him home safely. Then Hart had gone out of his way to check on him during his first few weeks working for the department to ensure he was settling in, and no one else had given him any more trouble. He was so caring and considerate with him. However, it was all so damn confusing and extremely infuriating because it was believed that Hart was straight. Well, he was going to find out once and for all. "Hey," Sin said, distracting Free from his reflections. "What's going on, Sarge?" Free asked, around a mouthful of bread. "Nothing much. Ranowski and Michaels are in for their shift. It's going to be a long night, so I'm going to head out. You can go. We're not doing anything else tonight," Sin said, leaning against the counter drinking a bottle of water. "The lieutenant's gone?" "Yeah. God was waiting on Hart, but his team's not leaving St. George for a few more hours, so they won't be arriving until morning." Damn it. Free really wanted to see Hart tonight. His cheerful mood deflated rapidly, and his sandwich now tasted like Chef Boyardee spread on dry toast. Free crumpled the last few bites in the plastic wrapper and chucked it toward the trash can. "Relax. He'll be here in the morning," Sin chuckled as he left the room. Free covered his eyes, sinking farther in the hard plastic chair. He was never going to fool anyone. Chapter 2. Hart. Hart stood at the rear of the car and stared down at the petite woman whose safety he'd been responsible for the last 16 days. She placed her trembling hand on his bicep and leaned closer to him. He could feel his team's eyes on him as the woman got emotional right there in front of 10 fully geared-up SWAT officers, a slew of St. George police, and several FBI agents. She ignored them all and concentrated on him. Being surrounded by uniformed men had been her life for the last 8 months, while the state put on a defense to take down a violent gang. The last day of the trial had been yesterday. It was over. Marianne reached up as high as she could and tried to drape her hands over his shoulders. Hart could sympathize. Marianne had been dealt the kind of hand in life that made a person question if there was a God. Her husband and only child had been victims of a gang-related drive-by last year that had also killed 4 other people. As the sole survivor of the attack, she'd cooperated with the FBI to give eyewitness testimony in exchange for full protection and a new identity. For the past 2 weeks, it had been Hart's job to get her to and from the court building safely.
"I'll never forget what you did for me last night."
She leaned her head against his chest, pressing against the equipment he was wearing.
"You're a very special man."
"Thank you," Hart said roughly. The woman had been a broken shell when he'd first seen her in the safe house just outside of Scottsdale. As the lengthy trial had worn on, there'd been 2 more attempts on her life, which only made her that much more determined to see justice served for her spouse and 9-year-old baby girl.
"No, I thank you, Ivan."
She peered up at him with watery green eyes. She took a few deep breaths as she tried to stem the tears. He let her have as much time as she needed. They all did. No one rudely cleared their throat or interrupted her goodbye. She wasn't just saying goodbye to the men who'd risked their lives for her every day, but also farewell to who she'd always been. Marianne reached into her pocket and pulled out the emergency alert beacon he'd given her last week to make her feel safer. It was designed like a necklace, only the Irish cross charm had a button on the back that could be pressed to alert their mobile command of her exact location. She placed it back into his palm.
"You won't know where I am anymore, will you?"
"No. No one will know." Hart leaned down and hugged her tightly. He felt her sigh and squeeze him back. He dropped his head and whispered against her temple. "You're gonna be fine, Mary. Whatever your new life is, try to embrace it, okay? Don't fight it, and you'll be just fine." She smiled somberly.
"Yeah, I'll try my best."
Hart pulled back and nodded once to the FBI agent waiting to take her to the airport. Where she'd land, he didn't know. He returned her wave as the unmarked car disappeared from his sight. Hart got into the passenger seat of the armored truck and motioned for his team to move. "Let's roll out. Time to go home." "Big Roger on that, Captain," his sergeant responded happily, maneuvering the huge APC, armored personnel carrier, out of the parking lot. An unnerving anxiety settled over Hart as they merged onto I-75. There was a certain individual back in Atlanta who he was dying to see, but he was unsure what the hell he was going to say when he saw him. It was about time he stopped being coy. A grown-ass man, a single man, at age 44 should be able to go after what he wanted. "So, Cap, what exactly did you do for Miss Marianne last night that made her so damn appreciative?" Fox asked him. Hart didn't bother to look at his lieutenant. He was sure Fox had that annoyingly sly smile on his face, and he wasn't in the mood to slap it off. "You're all animals, including you, Dinah." "Hey, I didn't ask the stupid question, Fox did. But inquiring minds do want to know," his sergeant chimed in. Dinah was a beautiful black woman with long black and blonde dreadlocks that she kept pulled up into a large, complex bun at the base of her neck. She was a gorgeous scorpion with a vicious sting. And Hart fully relied on her and his lieutenant to help him manage a high-demand SWAT team. "Inquiring minds? More like nosy minds want to know. Trifling minds want to know. Crass minds want to—" "Oh, come on. We're not any of those things," Fox said from the rear. "But you can't expect a woman to confess those kinds of sentiments in front of all of us, and we not ask about it."
"True. You were in her boudoir a long time, Cap."
Dinah chuckled, pushing the diesel truck hard down the interstate. "Boudoir?" Hart laughed. Dinah rolled her brown eyes.
"You know what I mean. In her bed chamber."
"I wasn't in her boudoir or freaking chamber. I was in the witness's room, comforting her." A loud round of cheers and ohs followed. Sometimes I wonder how old you all are, Hart grumbled. I didn't mean that kind of comfort. She sure was comfortable putting her hands on you, Fox added. He's so big and cuddly, Dinah said, trying to reach over and squeeze his shoulder. Okay, enough. Just get us home safely, Dinah, Hart ordered. He knew his team was giving him shit, they often did, but he didn't want to joke about what had happened last night. The woman had recently lost her husband and child. He'd provided her with nothing more than a friendly ear and a shoulder to weep on. The trial was over, and she needed a long, cathartic cry. It hadn't been until Marianne had wept herself to sleep on his chest that he'd finally pulled the covers over her and slipped out of there at 4 a.m. He'd ignored the disapproving glances he'd gotten from the 2 agents posted outside her door as he made his way back to his team's area of the safe house. Dinah pulled the truck into the station's underground garage a little after 10 a.m. They were all exhausted from having been up most of the night, then traveling for the last 5 hours. But there was no rest for the weary. They had to get all their gear cataloged and stored in their armory, get showered and be back in uniform and at their desks ready to report. Then the commander would make his way over and demand an immediate debriefing. All this was to be done before he'd even be allowed to eat breakfast. It was the life of a SWAT officer. His team came through the precinct doors still in full gear with their special operations assault rifles laid across their chests. The bullpen came alive with shouts as fists pounded on desks and chairs squeaked as the precinct stood to welcome them back. Hart nodded at a lot of the officers as they made their way to the elevators, even accepted hugs from a few of the female staff. Glad you guys are back, Hart, Captain Myers called from his office. Damn good job out there. More cheers rose from the officers. It was a great day for Atlanta, and it was huge recognition for the department that they'd gotten another gang off the streets. Hart nodded in the captain's direction, then turned and looked toward his friend God's narcotics department. The lights were bright inside the huge office, and he could see several of the detectives at their desks through the glass panels. God was standing with his hands in the air with a massive grin on his face. Hart threw his fist up, then gave God a sign that meant he'd be back after he handled business upstairs. Just before he turned the corner, he saw a familiar pair of dark, striking eyes watching him closely, making a shiver run down his spine. As soon as the elevator doors opened, he couldn't have been more relieved to see his own department. His assistant was already at his desk, with his office open for him. Hart passed his rifle to Fox and headed in the opposite direction, while his sergeant and lieutenant led their team to the armory. Hey, Hart, welcome home, his assistant, Carlos, jumped up from his desk the moment he entered. How are you? Oh, goodness, you look exhausted. I am, Hart groaned, straining to remove his protective vest. Any messages that need my attention now? No, they can wait. Good. I'll be in a conference with the commander at 11. Don't schedule anything for me after 2, please. Sure thing, Carlos answered. He came over and started unfastening clips on his uniform, removing piece by piece like he always did. When he had most of the belongings in a huge pile on the floor in his office, Hart stood unburdened in just his utility pants and a sweaty Atlanta PD t-shirt. Carlos scooped up his equipment and left. First thing he wanted was food. He was a big man and he hated missing meals, but he had to get in the showers and be ready for his boss. Hart was glad to see that Carlos had retrieved his uniforms from the cleaners and straightened up his office. They'd had to go so fast, he'd left it in shambles. On his way to the elevators, he ran into one of the administrative officers in the accounting department. Hi, Officer Lawrence. How are you? I'm fine. And please, it's Sasha for the millionth time. She grinned nicely before her rosy lips turned to a pity/pouty frown. Oh, look at you. I bet you've gotten hardly any sleep. None of my team has gotten much rest, honestly. But yeah, thank you. He wasn't quite sure what he was thanking her for. And there's still more work to be done before I can call it quits, so I better hit the showers before Commander Lark gets here. Hart shied away from the lust in her pretty eyes. Officer Lawrence, Sasha, was a lovely and, most importantly, brave woman.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?